As we continue our fantasy team previews, 32 teams, we are going over them all, talking every fantasy relevant player for the upcoming 2024 season. Make sure you guys drop a like and a follow if you're enjoying the content and enjoying the previews. Today, we're going to be talking about the Buffalo Bills, and this team went through a massive change this offseason. One of the key components for this Buffalo's Bills team was traded this offseason is Stefon Diggs, who had a really nice connection with Josh Allen, been the wide receiver one team for the last few years for this Bills team. And now this offense is going to look a little bit different. And when you lose a piece like that, it most of the time it offers opportunities for other players to step up. And I think, with the change in coordinator in the middle of last season, with kind of the antics that were surrounding this Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs pairing over the last couple seasons, I think it was time. And the Bills have kind of subtly started to make moves that let us know change was on the way. So for this Bills team, I expect them to be a competitive team in real football. And in fantasy, I think there's going to be just a couple key components for this team, and that's it. I don't really see a whole lot of huge fantasy days from this team. Like, we're not getting a top 5 receiver this season from the Bills, obviously. So where can we find a little value on this team? Obviously, it all starts with the quarterback play. Josh Allen had an amazing year last year. It kind of went unnoticed, I would say, in most fantasy circles. The way he was playing, he finishes a QB1 last year. And this is with Stefon Diggs really falling off in the second half. He played a clean season last year, threw for 4,300 yards, 4,306 yards, 29 touchdowns. And he also added another 524 yards and 15 touchdowns on the ground. So a ton of rushing touchdowns for one Josh Allen last year. And obviously that catapults when you score, 45 touchdowns in a year. That's going to make you the QB1. But we forget his impact in the ground game sometimes and how much that can be a difference. So it kind of reminds me a lot of like Cam Newton, obviously, in those QB1 seasons that he had, or the QB1 season he had. But when you're producing, 10 to 15 touchdowns on the ground as a quarterback, in addition to throwing for over 4,000 yards, makes you a very valuable fantasy piece. So will the loss of Stefon Diggs really affect Josh Allen? And I don't think it does. He's still, to me, in that top 4 range. And this team went and got a wide receiver at the top of the second round, who I think is going to be a pretty good complimentary piece. Also signed another decent name free agent wise and is expected to raise the level of their tight ends impact on the team this year as well. So with all that being said, Josh Allen going as a top 4 quarterback, probably the number 1 quarterback off the board in a lot of leagues, I think is justified. And would I take Josh Allen as the number 1 QB? I probably wouldn't. I think we saw a little bit of the ceiling last year. And what more really could he provide in this season outside of becoming more of the offense, maybe more rushing? But that 15 touchdowns last year, 500 yards on the ground, it seems to be a nice number for Josh Allen. Could he provide a little bit more? Absolutely. But when it comes to throwing the football, especially like the touchdowns, I do have some concerns that he's going to reach those numbers this year. So I would expect a slight drop off passing wise from Josh Allen. Maybe we get an increase in the yardage when it comes to rushing, but I would not take Josh Allen as a QB1 if you wanted to. I have no problem with interchanging any of the top 4 quarterbacks right now when it comes to Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. I feel like they're pretty interchangeable. If you want to put one on top of the other, I'm cool with that. So for me, Josh Allen going to be in that QB1 conversation. He's a top 4 quarterback. He's elite. I don't really see any reason why he wouldn't be a top 4 quarterback this season. When it comes to running back, James Cook, interesting, right? Like we saw him last year, and obviously the team had brought in like Leonard Fournette. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on with this running attack. And James Cook, for the beginning of the season, it was like, what are we getting out of him? There were some high expectations that he could be a valuable fantasy piece, and he was good, but we weren't seeing, a whole lot of consistency from him. And then in the middle of the season, it went from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, and now we had a whole different James Cook for about 3-4 weeks. He actually finished as the RB12 last year, had over 1,100 yards, only two in the ground, right? 2 rushing touchdowns. But he also finished with over 40 catches, had over 400 yards in the passing game, and then also had another 4 touchdowns in the passing game. So he was finding a lot of his value after the offensive coordinator switch for the Bills. He was finding a lot of his value in the passing game. And then it went like dark towards the last 3 weeks of the year when we needed him most. It got super inconsistent. So I have a lot of question marks about James Cook, and I think his finish from last year might elevate his draft stock when it comes to redrafts. He finishes the RB12. I think a lot of people are going to recognize that and say, yo, we don't want that kind of production this year without Stefon Diggs. This is going to be a volume player. So I think James Cook will be good. I just hope he doesn't go overdrafted come summertime. So for me, I'm cool with him in like the back end RB2 conversation. I think that's where he fits more so than this, RB12 to RB15 range. I think that's a little high for me when it comes to James Cook. Could he have a decent year on the ground? Yes, I think he'll still be involved in the passing game. But to me, I think there's more of a chance that he kind of is neutralized and not used as much in the passing game and is a very inconsistent RB2. That's where I think he fits in more so than, this rock solid RB1 that we saw during the middle of the season last year. So I think there's a lot to like with a young running back like James Cook Electric. Obviously, we know his brother's pedigree when it comes to Dalvin. To me, he fits in the RB2 range, more so mid to back end RB2. And I think, maybe there's a little bit of upside, but with Josh Allen running 15 in last year, probably going to do something similar this year. You lose a little bit of the touchdown upside, and his team did get some other options in the passing game as well this offseason for a lot of the short yardage stuff. Speaking of the passing game, you can't talk about this passing game and not talk about second-round pick KEON Coleman, who is, inherently the Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis replacement. Not only did this team lose Stefon Diggs last year, but they lost their big body downfield receiver in Gabe Davis. So that's the two main pass catchers for this Bills offense, and they're gone. There is a huge void when it comes to potential targets for this team. And I think KEON Coleman has a real nice opportunity to surprise people in drafts this year. He doesn't have the same first-round pedigree as a lot of the other receivers coming in this year. When we talk about Romo Dunes, we talk about, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., we're talking about Malik Neighbors. So Brian Thomas, like there's guys with higher draft pedigree, but I think this is one of the best landing spots for a wide receiver in the whole draft. Going and pairing up with Josh Allen, being a bigger body receiver, and then stepping into a workload that's going to offer a nice amount of targets. If we saw KEON Coleman with 80 to 100 targets, I don't think that would surprise anybody. So as long as he's able to step on the field, get acclimated to an NFL game, I think KEON Coleman could be a very, very nice steal in the wide receiver 4 range. More back-end wide receiver 4, but if you're getting him in the top 35 to 40 receivers, I think he's going to be a steal there. And that's about where I think he's going to I think he's going to fizzle in there when it comes to ADP. I can see him in the 35 to 40 range. People are going to recognize him as the number one on this team, even without him being the number one just yet. But KEON Coleman, a name to watch, especially if you're looking for different options, or maybe you're looking for high upside options later in your drafts. It's easy to get excited about, like I said, the Marvin Harrisons who step into a nice situation, and we're expecting a 1,200-yard season out of him, right? Like it's nice to have 1,000-yard expectations out of a rookie, but KEON Coleman is in a really, really nice draft spot here, going to Buffalo with the quarterback who can throw for 4,000 yards with ease. So I like KEON Coleman this year. I think he'll be a steal in drafts. Next up, we got Curtis Samuel, who signed in the offseason. Very good addition for this team, who was looking for a short yardage option last year. They've been looking for that really since Cole Beasley has left this team, and they've been looking for somebody to be consistent. And he had a nice, strong season in Washington last year. Finished as a wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 4 in your 12-team leagues. The wide receiver 42. 600 yards in the air. Also had 62 catches for 4 touchdowns, and then had a little bit of action in the run game as well. But we know what Curtis Samuel is. He's a chain mover, and he's somebody that can have, pretty good volume when it comes to potential targets in an offense. So he's going to be the short yardage guy, going to be a lot of checkdowns to him. But Curtis Samuel finding ways to get open, I think that's something he's excelled at his entire NFL career. When it comes to potential like production this season, I think we can expect around the same, somewhere in that 75 to 60 catch range, somewhere in the 750-yard marker, around 3 to 5 touchdowns. That's about where Curtis Samuel falls in, and it's going to be, he's more of a real life case than he is a fantasy like case for us. I think we can find some weeks during the bye where maybe he's startable if there's receivers out. But for the most part, we're going to be avoiding Curtis Samuel in drafts. So will he be a top 30 receiver this year? Is he the wide receiver one on this team? I think Keon Coleman really takes over that. And if it's not Keon Coleman, I got another name for you coming up here very shortly that I think would be the de facto wide receiver one for this team if that's the case. But Curtis Samuel should be a chain mover, should be a good practical piece for this team in real football. I think for fantasy, though, we're going to see an inconsistent free agent option. He's going to be a waiver type player most of the season. And then a lot of optimism for Khalil Shakir, who stepped into a nice role later in the year, had 600 yards on only 39 catches. So we knew the deep stuff was there. And he was the wide receiver 3 with Diggs and Gabe Davis there. I still think he's the wide receiver 3 now with Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman there as well. So he does have potential, though. And, Josh Allen really likes this kid. And so Khalil Shakir does have some potential, but it's going to come in waves. It's going to come in forms of the deep ball. It's going to come in forms of 3 catch for 60-yard type games. So while I think he has potential for this team to help this team in real football, I think for our fantasy teams, this is an inconsistent option. And in Dynasty, he doesn't have the same opportunity now that this team invested a very high second-round pick in getting Keon Coleman. So I like Khalil Shakir. I don't really think he has a whole lot of fantasy practicality unless you're in a 16-team league. But the player that could be the de facto number 1 wide receiver for this team was a first-round pick for this team last year, Dalton Kincaid. And when he took over mid-season there, Dawson Knox got hurt. There was a lot of optimism that Dalton Kincaid would be an elite, tight end 1 type prospect. And he had some really strong weeks and provided a lot for this Buffalo Bills team. Dawson Knox obviously had an injury last year. And so when he came in, he had some strong performances, 73 catches, 673 yards, 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns weren't really there, but what was good to see is 73 catches. Like, they were using him as a big slot. They were moving him around the field. And with Gabe Davis and Diggs gone, we're talking about vacated targets. I mean, that's a lot of vacated targets there. So while, this team invested a second-round pick in Keon Coleman, this is also a high draft capital player who was known as a receiver in college. They drafted him to damn near be a big receiver for this team. I like Dalton Kincaid this year. And, when we talk about potential guys that can impact your team, I think we're going to get a receiver at tight end out of Dalton Kincaid this year. I genuinely think that. Now, is it Travis Kelce? Is it Trey McBride? Is it Laporta? There's potential for top 3 to 5 production from a Dalton Kincaid, who we're probably going to get in the mid-tier of tight end ones. We're probably going to get him in the 6 to 10 range when it comes to tight ends. He's going to go after Andrews. He's going to go after Kelce. Going to go after Kittle. Going to go after Trey McBride. Going to go after Laporta. Probably in that Kyle Pitts range, maybe even after him. So there's a lot of potential when it comes to Dalton Kincaid. And if he really is going to serve as the de facto number 1 for this team, there's a load of opportunity there for him to see a 1,000-yard season, potentially 6 to 10 touchdown range. Good work here for Dalton Kincaid, and maybe see even in the 80 to 90 catch range. Like, I really like the potential here for Dalton Kincaid. It's just how good is Keon Coleman will be the differentiator of how Dalton Kincaid finishes. How good is Keon Coleman? If he comes in and immediately takes on a 1,000-yard workload, I think we see a strong season from Kincaid, but it'll be more of a number 2. If we get more of like an 800-yard season from Keon Coleman, I think Dalton Kincaid is going to be that guy. And we talked about short yardage stuff with James Cook, Curtis Samuel. It's like, this is going to open up the middle of the field, and Dalton Kincaid should have a really strong season. So give me Dalton Kincaid. I like his value. If we can get him outside of the top 7 to 8 tight ends, I think there's a ton of value there for Dalton Kincaid. This is somebody I'll be drafting if I'm going, if I got if I really like my setup and I'm not really trying to reach on tight end, and Dalton Kincaid's ADP is too low, I think he could be a value this year in drafts. So let me know your guys' thoughts on the Buffalo Bills players. If there's anybody else that I did not talk about that you want to have covered, drop it in the comments. And I'll be back with another fantasy team preview here shortly.